Jarvis, run Protocol 1, November Tango Romeo 0.
Yes, sir. Running the intro now.
Hey everyone, welcome to a new episode of Backlogged, where I am currently working through my backlog of games that I've already recorded footage for, whatever that reason might be. In this particular case today, I had been experimenting with Let's Plays for a while as an early video learning experience. Now if that sounds like fun to you, be sure to let me know. I'm totally willing to go back to some of that. Let's get into some VR gameplay with Iron Man VR for PlayStation VR. That's the old one, not PSVR 2. Don't have that quite yet. Does this game make you feel like Iron Man? Let's find out. Quick note, I don't tend to get VR motion sick, but if you do, just be careful. This one's you might want to do audio only for this one. It's gonna get kind of bumpy. I've spent years now feeling just a bit disappointed with VR gaming. Don't get me wrong here, VR technology is super impressive and really exciting. It just doesn't always feel worth it. Most VR titles I've experienced have been considered among the best, and I like to think of them as VR attractions. Let me illustrate this for you. You ever been to Disney World? There's a few different ways to engage with the activities there, but most of them are rides or shows. Basically, your level of interaction with what's going on is limited to watching, or maybe in a few cases, pressing a button or two. It is, for sure, a wonderful, unforgettable experience, but what do you really do? Ride rides and see shows. Now imagine that in a video game, a medium where interaction is the main feature to distinguish it from other forms of entertainment. It's just not much fun. A lot of VR games boil down to, here's a setting, stand here, pick stuff up, toss them around, look at all the cool stuff you can mess around with. It's also a little like handing a kid a cardboard box or a wad of paper to play with. Sure, if you get creative, you can have all kinds of fun, and there are dozens of channels out there that excel at making VR games tons of fun to enjoy. In my case, though, I want more. You'll hear me talk about this plenty over the course of my content, that too much freedom is not a good thing for me. I've got two specific examples for you, Minecraft and Skyrim. Two of the most enormous video games over the past decade, praised and worshipped for the freedom and accessibility of both. The ability to play how you want to play with almost no barriers or guidance. I appreciate those games for what they do, but for the dozens of times I've tried to really get into them, I just can't seem to do it. Skyrim is a bit better, providing me with a quest list to clean out that gives me something to work towards, but Minecraft, there's just nothing. I have tried and tried and tried to get into both of these games, but they just don't work for me. I need goals, quests, a story, even just a simple level structure, or like a 5-star rating or something. I do best at games that tell me, here's what you do, here's how you do it, there's your target, go get it. So VR games, ones that more often than not put you in a setting and turn you loose? Yeah, not my thing. Don't worry, I will eventually dive deeper into both of those earlier games for a backlogged review, and I do promise to be fair. Moving on to Iron Man VR, I wasn't too sure what to expect. It looked like a really cool idea, and one that ought to work especially well in VR. After all, a genius cinematic approach to Iron Man in the movies was that close-up view of Robert Downey Jr. seeing his HUD inside the helmet, an obvious parallel to the VR headset. Otherwise though, I didn't know what to expect at all. Trailers showed a lot of flying, a lot of shooting, and some staple VR storytelling. Before I get ahead of myself though, let me properly cover the story of the game itself. This game tells a story that would be pretty early in Iron Man's career. It starts with him shutting down Stark Industries' weapon programs, specifically a tender moment with one of his AI programs, the Gunsmith. Gunsmith was modeled after him and is a not-so-subtle image of Tony when he was a war profiteer. And that's okay. Iron Man isn't about subtlety after all. Cut to a few years later, Ghost shows up out of nowhere attacking Tony's private jet right after Tony gives up his company to Pepper Potts, who is moderately injured in the attack. This angers Tony enough to break out the Gunsmith again to help him hunt down the Ghost, a decision we all know he'll come to regret. Overall, it's a pretty good Iron Man story, if a bit heavy-handed in the haunted and hunted by his past tropes. It's not helped by the fact that Tony narrates the story constantly, often speaking to you from within a black void of nothing. I'm guessing this is masking the extra loading time this game apparently needs. Seriously, half of this game is loading time. But the decent, if predictable, story could almost certainly have been told better. Solid acting all around, though. At this point, I found out that one of my favorite activities to do in VR is flying. It does occasionally make me a bit queasy, but I love it. I kind of expected this game to play a bit like a Star Fox game with some movement, but otherwise mostly on rails blasting away at enemies. Well, that's almost completely correct. There is a lot of exploding, and it does feel quite a lot like Star Fox. You generally get graded for better performance each mission based on things like how much damage you take, how long a mission takes to finish, combo attacks, etc. However, it actually plays a lot more like Star Fox 64's all-range mode, where you have an arena you can free fly around as you're blowing up everything around you. That alone is pretty cool, but actually how you control the game gives you a unique perspective on what it's like being Iron Man. It's pretty crazy, actually. Only one thing could have got closer to feeling like Iron Man if they made some sort of shoe attachment control that could engage the thrusters. We don't have that here, so everything is controlled by your hands, but the controls are actually quite elegant. They do an amazing job of compensating for the PSVR's tragic use of the PS Move controllers that are, frankly, barely functional. I'm going to flip over to a camera view now and show you how the controls work, because it's very hard to explain, but I'll do my best. Okay, so basically you spend all of your time as Iron Man constantly thinking about both moving and shooting. If we have 4 face buttons on the remotes, these 4 specifically, the little shapes, not the giant top button. And those buttons do the same thing on both remotes. So you've got your top 2 are gonna turn, so you can look around because the PlayStation VR is a wired-in headset. You can't physically turn around without choking yourself. Don't do that, kids. Each one also has a button for hovering in place, so you can just stop wherever you are. That's going to be the bottom button on the outside side of the controllers as you're holding them. So that's... Hold on, I get the camera angle right here. These 2 right here. The inside button on each controller, the other one that's not hover, are the ones that you hold to enter a melee stance for a rocket punch. That's also how you do a ground pound into the ground. You press and hold melee, look where you want to land, and pound right down. It feels awesome. I really recommend carefully doing a quick crouch while you do that, because it feels like you're doing a superhero landing. Awesome. So that leaves the 2 giant buttons. You got a big fat one on top, big trigger on the back. In Iron Man VR, the triggers control your flight thrusters. Basically, you press and hold, it triggers your flight, and however you're holding these determines like what direction you're flying in. So if you want to go straight up, you want to point basically straight down, just stand at attention, press flight thrusters, you're going to go straight up to the sky. Something to keep in mind is that forward flying is largely determined by the location where you're looking. I found out doing a flight challenge that descent is actually pretty hard to control, and it turns out that actually physically moving my head down quite a bit really made a big difference. In order to fly forward, you're going to stand at attention like that again, but then pivot your hand to point the light bulb straight down, as if your palms are facing behind you, and then you get forward thrust. It's really hard to explain, but it feels okay when you're playing the game. Also, as you're flying, you have a quick little dash, which is the best way to dodge incoming attacks, and that's just a double tap, which is a critical maneuver. Make sure you learn how to do that. So that leaves your weapons. Aside from the melee attacks, your top buttons are going to control all of your other attacks, which is also a motion aiming thing. This is why you have to go back and forth between flying and shooting, because you have to aim your thruster to fly, you have to aim your shooter to shoot. So I find myself constantly just going back and forth. Sometimes I'm using both to fly, make sure I dodge out of the way. Sometimes I'm firing with both and just kind of either hovering or just kind of letting myself fall a little bit. A lot of times though, I've got one thruster out to kind of control my flight, dodge if I need to, and the other one is pointing and taking out the enemies. You have your main repulsor, which can overheat and require a recharge, but is otherwise unlimited. That is, you're gonna hold straight up like you're aiming a gun and press the top button instead of the trigger, because that's thruster, not shoot. It's a little frustrating actually. The game describes it as facing your palms forward to aim it, but that makes you want to do this, and your aim is not going to be right if you do that. So the correct way to do it is aim like you're holding a gun, press the top button instead of the back trigger, and you should have no problem with your repulsors. The other attack is actually if you point and aim your wrists down, you have auxiliary attacks, and those you have a lot of different options for what you want to put in there, and you can actually have a different auxiliary weapon on both left and right side. Very, very cool, very Iron Man. But that's going to be things like missiles, bombs, I think there's like an EM, like stun grenade kind of weapon. There's 9 different auxiliary weapons, and frankly, I find myself sticking with the smart missiles a lot for at least one, and then maybe I'll mix it up with the left hand, because it's harder to... I'm right-handed, it's harder to aim with that. That's the gist of how you control. So you're going to be looking where you want to go a lot, obviously looking around for enemy attacks incoming, flying, dodging, shooting, and a lot of times doing all of it at once, swapping hands. It's pretty crazy, but it feels really good, especially when you get good at it. When you know you got a good, if it's a flight challenge, for example, or if you have a really good combat encounter, it feels so incredibly awesome.
Okay, what I said was you'd feel amazing, not look amazing. Yikes. Getting back to the game, this is also one of the better looking VR games I've played. Most of this game looks sharp and well textured. I'm sure it's better now with PSVR 2 and other VR systems, but the first generation of VR tech tended to look bland, flat, blurry, or all of the above. I'm looking at you, Skyrim VR. Ugh, I need to stop ragging on Skyrim if I want to live. Anyhow, there are moments of flat textures here. Shanghai looks especially 64-bit, but it seldom hinders anything. None of the sounds are especially exciting. It sounds like Iron Man should, music and sound effects and all, but VR sound design requires certain touches, especially 3D surround sound, so you have one more sense available to help you play better, and that works very well here. The more missions you do, it can quickly become overwhelming trying to keep up with everything, but when I lose track of things, I can tune my ears in and often hear where attacks are coming from long before I can get eyes on them. And yeah, all the chaos sounds pretty cool. In a lot of ways, playing this game feels awesome. The gameplay is super fun and it makes you feel like Iron Man, and it's structured in a way that feels like a proper game, not just a quick VR experience. That said, it doesn't dodge every beam weapon that comes toward it. I'll remind you that VR is only just now reaching a point where the technology is able to meet the demands of gaming. That means that we're still stuck with Sony's camera and light-based tracking system for the motion controls here. These are among the best controls I've seen, but the PlayStation Move controllers just don't always work right. I don't often lose tracking here, but when I do, it's pretty bad. I did reset my controllers a few times to fix it. Also, there's very few ways to interact with this game using the Move controllers. This game does get a lot of leverage out of them, but I was most frustrated by the aiming being just a little bit off. Not in terms of missing shots, but you have to hold them like remotes. So when the game tells you to point your palm at something to shoot your repulsors, if you try to actually point your palm at it, you'll miss. You actually have to aim it like you're holding a gun, and that takes away from feeling like Iron Man. It's a small shame, but a shame nonetheless. More importantly, there are 3 things that bother me about this game. One is how the cutscenes are handled. VR cutscenes really should work more like Half-Life. And yes, I know about Half-Life Alyx, but I like having my kidneys, so I can't afford that. What I mean is, taking away control in a usual game's cutscene can still be fun, at least for me. I like watching my games almost as much as playing them. But it's different in VR. Having to stand and watch things happen around you, and especially to you, with no way to move or interact with anything, feels pretty dumb. There's especially a point when you're on the shield helicarrier and you get knocked down, it moves your view to the floor and you see Tony's body sprawled out in front of you. It's a neat effect, but I'm not moving, so it just makes me notice that I'm not being included. It's like I'm a ghost in a shell, seeing through Tony's eyes, but unable to affect anything. After flying around blowing up drones by the dozen, this lack of control is enormously lame. There are moments that have you interacting cutscenes, like when you grab something being given to you, and even something that simple and dumb feels way better in VR. So instead of just having me stand and watch, put together one of those playsets that VR games love. Give me couple apples I could try to juggle and fail, a drink box to sip on, a paper basketball to shoot while Nick Fury's probing me to build more weapons. It may not be a part of the story that's being told, but it gives me agency to continue being a part of the game while it's talking to me and telling me the story. The second thing that bugs me in this game, frankly, are those playsets I was talking about. Look, it's a popular VR activity to just give you piles of stuff around you that you can pick up and play with. Literally the entire game of Job Simulator is just that. And being in VR makes even simple, mundane things like that an absolute joy, just because it's possible to play in ways that would be incredibly lame in any other medium. This game has a few of those playsets, and yeah, I spent a couple minutes eating everything in the fridge, doing pull-ups, shooting hoops, but it doesn't feel like anything more than a VR tech demo. We are way past that now. You give me a bunch of random crap, yeah, I'll fiddle with it for those 5 minutes, but I will never return. I would much rather have that code being used for decently realistic pull-up physics to be incorporated into making another chapter or even another flight challenge, because that stuff is really cool and fun to do. I don't want to make smoothies, I want to go for a 5-star combat rating. And the third thing. Have I mentioned this is old VR tech? Yeah, about that. This game loads more often and longer than a PS1 game. They've made it a bit better now by letting you practice in a little shooting range on the loading screen, but it still takes forever. And then you usually have to listen to Tony monologue before you have another character give you the rundown of what's going on, and then finally 3 minutes after the loading screen, you can finally take off. I don't think there's a good fix for this on PSVR 1, but I would love to see what the PS5 and PSVR 2 could do for this game's egregious load times. And that's more than enough complaining now, because really this game is pretty great. I keep talking about the lame gimmicks that VR games do only because this game, for once, is actually a game. You got about 12 chapters of solid storytelling, smooth tutorials, awesome flying and shooting gameplay, and tense moments of interaction like deactivating bombs and opening big hangar doors. But there's more. Of the 7 or so arenas where the gameplay happens, each has its own combat challenge, a couple flight challenges, and a simple free flight mode. These are great because while the game itself is story-driven, these shine a spotlight on the main draw of this game, being Iron Man. The controls work well enough that both flying and shooting can be practiced and perfected, and these challenges make you do that. Each star you earn also gets you coins to upgrade the suit and unlock new abilities, ranging from acceleration boosts to a faster unibeam recharge to a bevy of auxiliary missiles and bombs to build your own Iron Man loadouts. That, my friends, is a proper video game, and that's why this is one of my favorite VR games to date. I did some research when I was working on this video, just to make sure I didn't claim this to be the only superhero-themed VR game. It's not, but the list I looked at confirmed that I'm not alone in my feeling like VR games tend to be short experiences more often than true video games. It also confirmed my feeling about Iron Man VR being one of the few true games in VR and being the best way to feel like Iron Man. You may notice as I keep doing more game reviews that I'll tend to talk about the counterpoints more often than my actual opinion of the game. What I mean is, when I like a game, when I think it's good, I'm quick to talk about legitimate complaints. And on the flip side, if I don't like a game, I will stretch to find any positives, which you'll see an example of that soon. So, when you hear me do a lot of whining, like I've done today, much of it doesn't hurt my overall enjoyment of the game in question. Iron Man VR has flaws for sure, but wins major points with me in the fact that it is a well-made game for what is now very underpowered VR hardware. Not only will you be hard-pressed to find a better virtual Iron Man experience, it's hard enough to find a VR game you may want to come back to after the first time you play it. It's really a shame because the way this game works makes me wonder if it could even be done on newer VR systems. Of course, that's only because I don't know exactly how the controllers work now. But it's a shame because more Marvel fans and VR fans should be experiencing this tight Iron Man video game. It's really good. The story in this game wraps up nice and neat as well. It doesn't stop beating the horse dead about Tony fighting his past self and moving on, and it's even more overt than modern MCU. But it has a nice Phase 1 or Phase 2 feel, kind of a less divisive version of Iron Man 3, and I have no problems with it. Sadly, there's enough evidence here to prove that it's not connected to the Spider-Man series we now have, and well, nothing's going to be connected to Avengers because it's officially dead. So, there's no MVGU for us yet. That would be Marvel Video Game Universe. There is a twist to this story that I won't spoil here. It's not bad, but my response to it was something like, oh, sure, that figures. The quality of the acting, gameplay, and sound design definitely makes up for the cookie-cutter Iron Man story we have here. I may not redo the story too much, but I can be convinced to come back for those challenges, and maybe even a free flight once in a while. There we are! It's another good addition to Marvel's video game library. I am so glad that we live in a world now where we don't have to think every Marvel game is going to be bad. Only some of them. Iron Man VR does an excellent job of making you feel like Iron Man, with a decent story and rock-solid gameplay that's actually worth returning to. It really gives me hope that developers can move on from the gimmicks of VR and start making awesome games that we can experience in a different way than we can with a normal controller. I'm not telling anyone to go out there and buy a $250 VR bundle just to play this one game. But I do hope that we'll get to see a sequel or even an updated version for PSVR 2. That'd be really cool. More people should get to feel like Iron Man, and this is easily the best option to do that. So if you happen to have this game in your backlog, be sure to finish it, but keep it around, just in case you feel like being Iron Man again someday. Thanks for watching. Sorry I made you wait so long for this one. Tears of the Kingdom really just destroyed my production schedule. But we're going to keep things running. Thank you so much for watching again, and here is your trivia question for the next Backlogged review. Phrased like a Jeopardy question, so here's your answer. This is maybe the first 3D platformer ever made, at least on a console. Hint, it's not the one you'd think it might be. I'll see you soon.